So I'm going to show how I make one of these automata. This is a toy that I commonly made for craft markets back when the world was normal. I'm not using anything particular in terms of wood species or nothing. I'm just picking the one that dimensionally fits about what I want to do. It ended up being some kind of oak, so here I'm going to plane it down, going for about somewhere around a ½ inch in thickness. Projects like these I find I don't spend a lot of time with measurements or worrying particularly about particular dimensions. I'm going to straighten out this board, and I'm probably going to end up with a dimension, I think it was somewhere around 4 inches or so. After the width is defined, I'm going to cut a groove in the front and the back on the inside of this box. This is basically to accept 2 panels that I'm going to use that 1/8 inch plywood for. A lot of time can be saved if you finish the box before you actually build the box, if that makes any sense. So here I'm going to do the sanding and staining long before I actually cut the sides into the final dimension. Nothing complicated about the stain, it's just your basic water-based wax on, wax off. This is where I have to start dealing with some lost video clips. What I'm doing right here is I've turned the table saw blade to 45 degrees. I'm going to do miter joints on all the corners of the box. In this step here, I'm just cutting to a rough, oversized dimension, and then I was going to go back and do a more precise cut for the other side of the miter. Using a stop block so that I can get the exact same dimensions for each side of the box. This is basically going to end up to be a square. After the sides have all been cut to the right dimension, I'm going to set this up to do a dry run of the glue fit. The next lost video clip is me actually gluing these together, but you can see from the dry run essentially how I do this. It's time to move on to the waves. For this I'm just using some pine and then cutting them into fairly thin strips. I'm going to make all the waves at once and then cut them to the right length. The length of them ultimately is determined by the width of the inside of the box, plus a little bit of wiggle room. To make one side of these strips to look like waves, I'm taking my pieces of wood together and I'm running them against the edge of a disc sander just to make a whole series of tiny grooves. And then I'm turning it around and doing another path, and then you'll see the end result. It resembles a wave pattern. Time for some color. I'm going to use oil-based colors on these. I just find that they look a little bit better. To control the amount of penetration of these oils, I'm going to coat it with linseed oil first. I tend to prefer more of a washed-out version than the actual more intense version. It just gives it a more old-timey kind of feel to the toy. Here I'm going to cut all the waves to the right length. To your left you can see a little stopwalk on the end where my slider table is. I'm just going to square off an edge, and then I'm going to start running them up right up to the slider block, and that way they all stay the same length. And again, the length was from measuring the inside of the final finished box and then subtracting about 1/8 of an inch for some wiggle room. Here I'm finding out how many waves can actually fit inside of my box, so I'm just basically doing a little dry fit to see how many I can fit in there. For the mechanics of the waves, I made to make 2 holes, one on either side of the ends of the waves themselves. I used the first one as a bit of a template. This is a little stop motion about how I made the actual boat. This is a type of clay that you can harden by putting in an oven once it's formed. I'm going to paint these pieces after just to give them a bit more of an intense color. I don't have any wires thick enough to make the mechanism for this toy, so what I'm going to do here is just take the wire that I have and double it up by twisting it inside a drill. What makes this toy work is 2 wires. On the left side of the wave I'm putting a straight wire, and on the right side I'm making a wire that I bend into a little bit of a spiral. And those both go through those holes that I drilled in the previous step. This extra long step is only because I enjoy watching the drill twist up the wire like this. This next clip is how I put the spiral in one of the wires. It's as simple as wrapping a wire around a dowel. You don't have to do a tight spiral. This is a little bit too tight actually. I end up pulling the dowel out of here and then just kind of straightening out and flattening it out until I get a nice gentle wave pattern. The next step is to start putting everything together and see how it works. I'm showing a hole that I drilled in one of the waves. That's where I'm going to glue the boat in. Now that the mechanism for the waves are in, I'm just going to bend this extra part up into a rudimentary handle. And then off camera later, I'm going to use dowels and make a little bit of a spacer block and a crank. So this is the finished box with the waves installed and the crank installed and working, and now it's time to glue in the little sailboat that I made previously. I felt like this boat looked a little bit too lonely, so I ended up making him a little friend. I'd like to thank you all for watching. This was actually my first video ever made, and hopefully more to come.